Today's video is sponsored by Third Wave Water. So everyone is calling this thing the new AeroPress killer. And AeroPress themselves even published a Takedown article on their website about this thing. 45 bucks, very portable. No paper filters. Hot coffee, cold coffee, sounds like a new and improved AeroPress, right? After spending some time with the OXO Rapid Brewer, this is not an AeroPress. It's not even the same type of brewer. And once you kind of wrap your head around how that looks and what that means, deciding whether or not you should get one gets a lot simpler. Now, this one was sent to me by the team at Cafuné here in Canada. And before we get any further on this thing, if you saw my video on something called soup, you'll know that the coffee enthusiast community has really latched on to this thing. They've developed a method that is separate from what OXO recommends and yields some very interesting results. So I'll leave that video here, but this video is not necessarily about soup. This is about the merits of the OXO Rapid Brewer and how it compares to the brewer that nearly everybody compares it to, the AeroPress. Now it's got 5 separate components. It has the base right here, which has a metal filter inside. In there, you'll have a little tamper. Then you have the Triton water chamber, which has this integrated shower screen in there, the pump, and this little itty bitty carafe. And when you have the whole thing together and you're holding it, it does feel pretty premium and well put together for what is essentially a plastic coffee maker. You know, for 45 bucks, I think it feels like it's worth 45 bucks, but the question isn't how it feels. The question is, what does it actually do? And I think that this is not actually explained very well, very often. You see, the AeroPress is an immersion brewer. And that means that more or less, it works kind of like a French press. You put your coffee in here, you cap the top, and then you let it steep and everything kind of commingles in there. And then once it is fully extracted, you press out the coffee. The OXO Rapid Brewer is something totally different. You tamp espresso grounds into the basket, you put the water on top, and then you press this pump, which forces the water through that puck of coffee. That's called percolation, and it is slightly different. It's actually a little bit closer to something called a delta press or even traditional espresso, where it's fresh water working its way through the puck very quickly on its way out directly into this little tiny carafe. Different method, different quirks to each method, which we're going to talk about, and different result in the cup as well. Now, when you look at the instructions for the OXO Rapid Brewer, it will tell you that it will do either both hot coffee or cold coffee in a concentrate. And that concentrate line is where a lot of people kind of get messed up with this brewer. It's not a way that many people are actually used to brewing coffee, especially if they're just kind of getting into things. What comes out into this little cup is not technically a finished beverage. You're meant to add water to it in order to make up your finished beverage. And exactly how much water to add, or even the process of doing that at all, is a very common confusion point when people are new to using this thing. Something like the AeroPress can do a concentrate recipe, but it's very commonly used to brew you a finished cup of coffee. Now, we're going to start with hot brewing, but before we actually brew a cup of coffee and compare how these are going to taste, one note about water. Before you upgrade any of this stuff, look at an AeroPress, look at an OXO Rapid Brewer, look at pour over, look at new grinders, anything like that. You should be using really good coffee, and you should also be using good water. And at least for me, water wasn't something that I actually thought about for a long time when it came to my coffee brewing. You see, when you're using tap water, there's all kinds of dissolved minerals in there that are actually going to impact the way your coffee tastes when it gets into your cup. In most cases, that impact is actually not for the better. This stuff comes in these little tiny single serve packets, and you get yourself a gallon of distilled water. You put this in, you shake it up, and what you're left with is water that is perfectly formulated to complement and elevate the flavor of your coffee. Third Wave Water has formulas for light, medium, and dark roast, as well as for espresso machines that protect your machine. And they give all my viewers 10% off a one-time order with the link in the description. Now, all that being said, let's brew some coffee. And we're going to start with the OXO. So I have 20 grams of coffee here, and I have the water heated up to 201 degrees Fahrenheit, which is kind of within their spec. I'm using quite fine grinds, and once I've kind of shaken them and leveled them out as best I can, I'm just going to give them a tamp down with the tamper here, and then I'm going to put this water reservoir on top here. Then I'm going to start my timer, and I'm just going to fill this up with 165 mils of water. Then I'm going to put this back on here. Now the water will start to seep down into the puck and give it a little bit of a pre-infusion. Recipes for both of these will be down below. Now, while that's sitting for 2 minutes, we're just going to put the AeroPress filter in here. I've got water for the AeroPress heated up to 185 degrees down there on the other kettle. I'm going to put in 18 grams of coffee. And AeroPress's core recipe has us filling up to the number 4, giving a quick stir, and then capping for 30 seconds. Now, I think I've timed this pretty decently because they're going to end up at the same time. So after 2 minutes on here and 30 seconds on here, I'm going to start pumping this, and I'm also going to press down on the AeroPress. And both of them will hiss when they are done. The AeroPress just takes a little bit longer because it's a little more liquid to go through there. And I would say it's maybe slightly harder to press than the OXO. Now, like I said, this is basically finished coffee. And this is still a concentrate. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this on the scale, and I'm going to add water until I have about a 1-to-2 ratio. And then you can see, using the core recipe, we have roughly the same amount of coffee from both brewers. If anything, a little bit more coffee from the OXO, but we also used more ground coffee. Now, let's see how these compare when it comes to taste. Okay, so first, the OXO. Okay, that's a nice cup of coffee. The AeroPress brews I also really like. That's also a really nice cup of coffee. Good definition of flavor. Really both very nice coffees. This is coffee from Hatch. Now, if I had to articulate the difference here, I find that the cups from the OXO are a little bit more like drinking Americano. There's a little bit more body. There's a little bit more rounding in the flavor. The AeroPress tastes crisp, clean, very clear, a lot more like filter coffee or regular black coffee if you're in North America. I think when it comes to which one you actually like, it's really going to depend on the person, but both produce a really nice cup of coffee. Genuinely quite different cups though. Now, I do want to touch on cold brew here for a minute because this is a selling point in particular for the OXO. They kind of say it's a unique thing that only the OXO does. You can do a cold brew with the AeroPress. Looks a little different. Both cold brew recipes are reasonably quick. The OXO takes about 5 minutes. You follow a very similar procedure with room temperature water. And the AeroPress takes 2 minutes. So while there is a bit of a difference in speed, it's not the main differentiator. With the OXO, you're just going to let it sit there for 5 minutes and you're going to let it kind of slowly soak into that puck before finishing the drink with the plunging motion of the pump here. With the AeroPress, you're sitting there kind of aggressively stirring it. And while you're doing that, it's draining out into the carafe. So when it comes to cold brew, the OXO is both a little bit more hands-off and also a little bit more controlled. Now, one quick note on cold brew from both of these things. They're not going to be like a 12 to 24 hour cold brew. You know, when somebody has made cold brew by letting it sit for an extended period of time, you're just going to get a richness and intensity that you're not going to get with either one of these methods. So we got some really good coffee from both brewers. And I actually really like specific style of coffee that you get from doing both soup and the OXO Rapid Brewer's core recipe. How do you decide if you want to spend $40 on an AeroPress or if you want to spend the extra $5 and do the $45 for the OXO Rapid Brewer? Here's where I actually land with this. I think when it comes to versatility, there's actually a little bit more that you can do with an AeroPress. I remember my first experiences with the AeroPress, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was confused by the instructions. I just put coffee and hot water in, and what came out was a big improvement over what I was doing before. It is a really hard brewer to mess up. And that's because of the way that it extracts coffee, that immersion style. And beyond the core recipes of the AeroPress, there's lots of things that you can do with it. You can do inverted recipes, you can do really different things with your grind size, give you some changes in your cup. You can do espresso shot style profiles. You can make a full cup of coffee with it. You can even forget about your coffee for like 10 minutes and just leave it steeping, and it's not going to over extract. There's high dosing competition recipes that you can use with it. There just is a lot of flexibility because of the way that it works and is designed for people to make it their own and get a pretty consistently good result every time. The OXO Rapid Brewer does make excellent coffee. It has a little bit of a narrower lane, and it is slightly easier to mess up and slightly more confusing when you first get it, because you're always thinking in terms of creating a concentrate that isn't necessarily designed to be your finished beverage that you need to add something to after you're finished. That being said, it's very good at what it does, and the cups are fantastic. Cleanup is also a consideration. With an AeroPress, you take the lid off, you pop the puck out, and you give the end of the plunger a little rinse, and you're basically off to the races. With the OXO Rapid Brewer, there is no paper filter, which is nice to not have to worry about that, but then you have to knock the puck out, which can leave some grounds in there. It's generally not quite as nice of a cleanup. Also, there are a couple more parts required with the OXO. You have this tamper, you don't want to lose that. These 3 different pieces here. Some of it is dishwasher safe, but the pump is not actually dishwasher safe. You don't want to be submerging this in water. The AeroPress is really just a simpler piece of equipment, so there's that as well. I did some digging on this, and I couldn't find a whole lot in the way of pump failures, but it is a failure point that the AeroPress doesn't have. Now, when it comes to the cold concentrate thing, I really do think that the OXO Rapid Brewer has a better system going on for this. The AeroPress with the really fine grinds, and you're stirring it to try and get it to extract, it just feels a little janky. And when you're doing cold concentrate with the OXO Rapid Brewer, you can go finer with the grind. You just let it sit there. You're not trying to stir the thing up to get an extraction. And then when you're ready and it's totally saturated, you could just do a nice slow pump, and it feels better, and it makes a nice little cold concentrate. I think it's a better workflow, and the concentrate is decent, even if it's not like actual cold brew. It may have a little bit of a narrower lane when it comes to grind size when you consider the percolation brew method. But if you have a decent grinder, and especially if you would consider yourself maybe a little bit of a hobbyist or enthusiast and you want to do the soup thing, it is really, really a fun way to brew with this thing. Now, I want to come back to that AeroPress Takedown article, because I find this really, really fascinating. When you read the thing, which I'll link to it down in the description, it almost reads like a diss track in blog post format. And you'll see a lot of claims on there. And to be fair, I think OXO probably is going after some of the market segment by AeroPress. Even when you look at the packaging of the OXO Rapid Brewer, it's very reminiscent of earlier AeroPress packaging. Similar look, so I get it. But on that blog post, you'll see claims about the OXO Rapid Brewer being finicky, unhappy customers sort of piling up around this thing. Some of it is fair. The cleanup is maybe not as nice. It can be a little bit confusing to use, but so can the AeroPress, frankly. And I do think that that level of complexity and finickiness is kind of overstated in that article. I think, to be honest, that some of that is just protecting turf. And I think when you have a big established brand like AeroPress that's been in the industry for 20 years, publishing an article targeted at another specific product, I think the fact that they even put that out there tells you something. Now, on the transparency side, I always reach out about this, manufacturing standards, labor standards, all this kind of thing when it comes to any product that I'm reviewing. I asked OXO about this actually several times over couple months. and they left me on red every time. So that's not great. If I do get an updated statement from them, I will leave it down in the description. But a couple notes. The OXO Rapid Brewer is made in China. The parent company of OXO is a company called Helen of Troy. Now, this is the same company that manufactures Hydro Flask and Osprey. It's a Bermuda registered company. And they do have a 1% for the planet membership. Now, there are some nuances about how that works, but I will leave more info on it down there in the description if you want to dig into that a little bit more. And I do think that they are actually the largest housewares contributor kind of within that program. So where do we land here? Number one, I actually would travel with the OXO. You know, if I wanted a brewer for around $50, I would definitely consider this. It's cool. The coffee it makes is really good. The soup thing is really cool. Definitely check that out. I like the taste. I think if you're looking for something that has that just works, you know, I can do it wrong and it's still going to taste fantastic every time, the AeroPress is going to give you a little bit of an easier entry point. But I think the main takeaway is this kind of does something that is actually just a little bit different than the AeroPress. You know, it's not an AeroPress replacement. It is something that makes a specific type of coffee. It does it really well. And it's kind of its own thing that does its own things. And I think once you decide what thing you actually want, it makes this whole decision actually a whole lot easier. So I'm going to leave that soup video here at the end for you to go and check out. Fascinating story overall, but let me know, are you team OXO or are you team AeroPress? Let me know down there in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you on the next one.